Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Just slip out the back, Jack. Make a new plan, Stan. You don't need to be coy, Roy. Just get yourself free.
Oh, that is a good choice. We're talking about family law. That's a clever segue there, Dwayne. You've outdone yourself again. We're talking about family law, breaking up relationships. David Halkett, partner at Macquarie Hunter, joins us along with Leah Donaldson, an associate at Macquarie Hunter in Surrey and on top of the Surrey Central building at SFU, right?
That's correct, yep.
Okay, I got it right. All right, so we talked before the break about how it's determined for child support, and now how do you do the calculation for spousal support? And I guess there's a combination of the two.
There is, yeah.
There
is, yeah.
Leah, so how do you do that?
So spousal support, it's not the same as child support in that there isn't federally mandated amounts. There's spousal support advisory guidelines.
So before the break when we were talking about child support, that's a federal sort of
federal guidelines came into effect, and they were pretty well adopted in every province, and the numbers are based on where the payer resides.
Okay, so then
it's a set amount based on income and number of children.
That's a formula, right?
Exactly.
And it's not the case for spousal.
No, they do have a formula, but it's not mandated. The judge will have some discretion about how they apply it. But the factors that go into determining spousal support are the incomes of each party. So if there's a disparity between the incomes, the length of the relationship, so if it was a long-term relationship versus a short-term relationship, the ages of both of the parties, so if they're younger and at the beginning of their career versus at the end close to retirement, as well as if child support is being paid, that factors in obviously, because if the payor is paying both child and spousal support, that's going to affect the amount that the disposable income they have to pay. And with those,
does it look at when you have the children and the spouse? Does it look at what's left over for the higher income person? Like
yes, absolutely.
So they have to be left something.
Yes, it's the goal is to equalize the standards of living in both houses, wherever the children reside. So if they're shared or if they're with one party, the payor or the recipient. And then the guidelines provide a range. So they provide a low, a mid, and a high amount of spousal that's paid, say, monthly, as well as a range for duration. So the length of time that you actually have to pay.
10-year marriage, typically how long would someone pay spousal support?
Typically, the maximum would be 10 years. The minimum would probably be about 5.
Okay.
Depending on the age of the recipient, because if the age of the recipient and the length of relationship is at least 65, then it's indefinite. So you could have an 8-year relationship, but you were
the
together.
The spouse is 60.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. So it depends on. There's a lot of factors in each one.
There is, yeah.
And who decides that? The judge?
Ultimately, yes, but lawyers can use the spousal support advisory guidelines, so the formula, to determine what is a reasonable amount and hopefully settle on a specific amount before going to court. But ultimately, the judge will make the determination.
But you don't have to do that. You can just decide on your own.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And the one thing that the guidelines don't deal with, though, is entitlement.
What does that mean?
Whether or not you should get spousal support.
Oh.
So before the guidelines kick in, you have to show that the recipient has entitlement to it.
Yes.
And that can be on a needs-based, non-compensatory method. So we were together, we broke up, I don't have any money at this point, or I need money to be able to get a house, whatever. There may be a needs-based. You also have compensatory maintenance, which is based on the traditional marriage model, whereas Leah and I are together, say, for example, she gives up her career for 10, 15 years to have our children, and then she goes back into the workforce at 50, and it's like, okay, I got to go back into my law career. What do I do now? I've been out of the workforce for 15 years. You get compensated for your lost income, lost job opportunities, lost pension, etc. And so that, again, the amount you're paid is based on the difference in incomes, but that isn't based on necessarily a need. It's the fact that you had a loss over the time. You're compensated for the loss.
So that's really there to help women who have stayed home, or men now. Yeah. Okay, what do you do in a situation, and you see this often in people who are tradespeople, a drywaller, tile layer, or whatever, does a lot of work for cash. You know, it's all under the table. Guys, you know, doing all kinds of renos, and it's like, hey, pay me cash, right? So they've got a business where they're making a good income, but they're not. It doesn't show up on their T4. So how do you get around that?
One of the ways you can try to get around it is by pattern of spending. So if a party has an expensive car and they go on vacations and they go out and eat in restaurants all the time, their T4 might show at, $40,000, but when you look at their pattern of spending, that money is coming from somewhere and they don't have debt to correspond to it. So the court can make an inference that in fact they are working for cash.
And what do you do when somebody's in a situation where they're selling drugs? It's an illicit way to make money.
Yep.
You must have run across people that says, well, the guy, he sells pot, and he makes, 60 grand a year doing that.
Well, what happens a lot in my experience in those cases is assuming that the party I represent knows the other one is doing that, the other party tends to want to resolve it because they don't want it going.
They don't want
court.
the heat, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't shine a light on this.
Exactly. They'll agree to something because they know the other one has the ability to
rat them out.
Exactly.
So yeah, those ones are easier than you would think.
Those get resolved.
Yeah.
Now, I guess the same thing is true if the guy who's a tradesperson and isn't claiming everything, he's worried that the spouse is going to rat them out to CRA, right?
Well, the difference in that, though, of course, Zach, is if a spouse rats you out to CRA and there ends up being an audit and you owe tax, it's a family debt. So it could be a Pyrrhic victory for you. So in that case, usually the party will agree will agree on a certain amount of income, knowing that it's going to go forward and they don't have to deal with it.
It's still a good tactic, I'm sure, for bargaining.
Although as lawyers, we don't really have the ability to. The spouse may do it themselves between themselves, but as lawyers, we're legally bound not to do that. We can't say we'll rat you out to CRA if you.
No,
don't
I'm
do
just
that.
saying, between spouses, it's like
exactly.
You better give me what I want, or else I'll call the tax man.
Oh, I'm sure there's been those conversations in a lot of my cases.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of skeletons in people's closets, right? People are up to no good. They're doing things on the sly, and their spouse knows about it, and they keep quiet, right? And that's when these things come out. Well, I know you did this, right?
Well, my sister had a neighbor who that happened. They were somehow connected to the motorcycle gangs, and she would, all of a sudden he was trying to cut her off money, and she had a meeting with his dad, and who all of a sudden he told him, "You're settling this because we're not going anywhere else."
Yeah, we don't want to shine any more light on this.
Exactly.
So what happens in the situation with either children or a spouse where the money dries up? Like that obviously is a big factor in the long-term maintenance, and that's when you guys get involved again, right?
Well, there's two factors in that. There's if an order is being ignored, the recipient can go to Family Maintenance Enforcement, and they can register the order, and then the government collects it for you. They
garnish you wages and stuff.
Exactly. Take away your driver's license, passports, etc.
And that's free. That's a government service.
Yeah. So that's assuming the person's ignoring the order. Now,
and what's the percentage of people who just don't want to pay?
Actually, I think it's lower than we think. The amounts are a lot because the people who don't pay, the amounts really increase. But for me, in most of my cases, it's paid. A lot of them.
Because once especially you might get enforced a little bit, like they might take your driver's license, and then after that person
they smarten up.
Pays.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what about the situation where, hey, this guy makes $100,000 a year, and then he has a couple of bad years, and he's making $50,000, $60,000 a year, but he's still got this payment he's got to make every month? Can you go back and say, listen, it's not working out, my business isn't doing well, I'm not making as much money?
Yeah, you can. I mean, the first step in that would be, if it's legitimate reduction in income, then you would approach the party that you're to be paying and try to negotiate something. And if it is legitimate, often the other party will understand that, and you can come to some sort of temporary agreement to suspend it. But if it isn't legitimate, we do have people, say, quit their jobs or get fired.
Try to starve the other person out, right?
Exactly. Try to reduce their income. In that case, you're not likely going to get an agreement from the other side, and that sometimes does end up going to court.
You're not going to have a sympathetic judge either.
Well, does the judge say you're just being lazy? Like
Yes.
if, for example, we'll go back to the tradesperson, and he used to work 7 days a week because the housing market was so crazy, he could get more work than he wanted, and now he's only working 3 days a week. Can the judge just say, can he say, well, I got a bad back? Or
if he has evidence that he's incapable of working as much as before, that's a factor. Judges and courts tend not to make you work more than a 40-hour week.
No, I'm just saying as an example that he had more work than he could deal with, and now he's saying I have no work.
If he has to show that he's incapable of working, that if there's a downturn, that's a factor that the parties wouldn't have anticipated. That could allow a reduction. But if you voluntarily retire early, if you cut back your work, and it's not child related, so I used to work 6 days a week, but now I only work 4 because I have the children 3 days and I don't want to be putting them in daycare. That may be a legitimate reason. But if you decide I'm just working less, the court can just impute you in the income before and say you can work less. That's up to you, but you still got to pay the amounts that you had. I'm
sure there's a lot of people affected in Fort McMurray who are making X number of dollars and now they don't even have a house, or there's been a lot of. So that's when you would go to the court and say, listen, this is a temporary thing. Hope to get back on my feet.
And they may reduce it for a short period, suspend the amounts for a bit. You're better to do it proactively than to try and do it retroactively. Like you get your arrears up for a year because you didn't pay, and they say, well, I want to reduce. The court may say, well, I'm not reducing it. If you'd come to me 8 months ago, I may have reduced it then on a short-term basis.
All right, interesting stuff. When we come back, we're going to pick up our conversation about family law, what to expect, and the different things to maneuver through. David Halkett is a partner of Macquarie Hunter in Surrey, and Leah Donaldson, an associate. We'll continue the conversation next on The Law Show on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.